Over the past 2.5 years, because the 2020 election and COVID-19, everything we know about politics and medicine has changed. Our perception of truth has been severely dashed to the point that no one believes anything any expert says. Because of all the deafening, distracting noise, important discoveries in medicine have been cancelled out by utterly irrational nonsense. In this video presentation, the God virus, years of peer-reviewed scientific research will be discussed, and the real culprit for what has been killing millions of people over the past few decades worldwide, from heart disease, neurological diseases, diabetes, and most other chronic diseases, will be revealed. The good news is, it's completely preventable. Plus, when patients suffer with these chronic diseases, they can be slowly reversed. So, let the discoveries be revealed. Over the past few days, shocking news has been broadcast all over the internet concerning the relationship between COVID-19 and folded over prions. Dr. Nordquist has been studying and writing concerning prions and chronic disease for a long time. Folded over prions are related to beta amyloid, which is associated with mad cow disease, chronic diseases such as heart disease, diabetes, neurological diseases including Alzheimer's disease, manic depression, obsessive-compulsive disease, and dementia. Understanding what prions are is the most misunderstood concept in medicine today. However, after listening to this presentation, you will understand what they are and how they benefit us. It's completely opposite from what we are led to believe. Whether prions are the chicken or the egg in COVID-19 is the question. The answer defines all chronic disease. Dr. William Nordquist was born on April 9, 1944, in Montour Falls, New York. Early in his life, he showed a precocious interest in natural health and probiotics. Today, is an internationally recognized leader in the science of what is called oral systemic health. Oral systemic health is the study of the relationship between the health of the mouth and how it relates to the other parts of the body as a whole. The truth concerning health has been extremely controversial. However, despite years of resistance by his peer, he stuck to telling his patients the inconvenient truth concerning health. Namely, the ill health of the mouth is the first sign of trouble elsewhere in the body. Dr. Nordquist has had diverse experience in his education. He started out as a music major at the Eastman School of Music in Rochester, New York. He then received a Bachelor of Science degree in chemistry at the Rochester Institute of Technology and worked as an organic chemist for Eastman Kodak Company, both also in Rochester. While planning his future for a PhD in chemistry, his military draft status changed to 1A, and to avoid interrupting his educational path, he pivoted in his career to pursuing dentistry and dental research. He earned a doctorate of dentistry and a combined postdoctorate DMS degree in oral biology with a major in oral and general pathology from the University of Louisville. He pioneered this combined degree program, was awarded a full scholarship, and was the first to graduate in the program. The research completed was extremely productive and produced 4 major publications which were distributed in all 4 dental research journals at the time. Subsequently, Dr. Nordquist joined the United States Navy as a dental officer and completed a hospital residency at the Naval Regional Medical Center in San Diego, California, that included training in the various specialties of dentistry. He then served on a submarine tender as a dental officer and there achieved the rank of lieutenant commander before leaving the U.S. Navy for private practice in San Diego, California. Dr. Nordquist is a diplomate in the American Board of Oral Implantology and has numerous professional fellowships and diplomates in several implant dentistry organizations, and his career has continued over 50 years. He has lectured internationally for years, published numerous books and professional papers concerning oral health and implant dentistry, and practiced implant dentistry in San Diego, California since 1976. His most recent book, published in March of 2020, Killer Viruses, Rising from the Flames of COVID-19, Lyme Disease and Other Chronic Diseases, could be the first book published concerning the COVID-19 virus and the God virus, which you will quickly find out that it is more commonly referred to as the Sphinx virus. Today, Dr. Nordquist is going to focus on the God virus and why it is so important to understand. Health has been elusive for decades, and chronic disease has devastated our health, causing hundreds of millions of deaths during this time period. The truth is now revealed, and optimum health can be achieved now that the mechanism behind the stealth killer has been unraveled. Now let's delve into the subject of ultimate health and longevity.
This lecture was prepared and recorded on Dr. Nordquist's Freedom Express sailboat located in San Diego Bay, in San Diego, California. This boat served as a refuge for inspiration by him for many years. Most of his books were written there, and this lecture, as well, was conceived and presented there. The light variation during this presentation is due to the boat's soothing movement in water. Hope you enjoy the ambience during this most important presentation.
Everyone, this is Dr. Bill Nordquist. I'm coming to you from sunny California. I'm a practicing dentist. I practiced for 50 years, although I did retire about 10 years ago and semi-retired and practiced a day or two a week. And due to circumstances over the last few months, I had to reestablish my corporation and set up a new practice, which is located in El Cajon, California. The good news that the research in recent months and the last few years, especially during the last 2 years, is so monumental that I can't believe that it isn't more well presented by the media or by physicians or by anyone for that matter. But the bad news of it has been totally overshadowed by this COVID-19 pandemic. And so virtually no one knows about what I'm going to tell you today. Not only the pandemic, but the elections. And so for many of us, all the things that we believed in before these two events happened have been dashed, and our hopes of things that we had hoped for in our life is kind of obscured by these two political things. And so it was very discouraging. And so I still knew that we had made just fantastic discoveries. And so I've plowed on. And so I found and discovered a new program which I'd like to present to you today. Here's a list of these great discoveries. It seems to be an imbalance in key bacteria that cause immune suppression and actually intelligence decline. This immune suppression unfairly targets women. The recently discovered Sphinx Virus seems to be related to all the things that are associated with chronic disease. That's a huge discovery in the last very, very few years. Another discovery was that nutrients in our diet can actually reverse heart disease, the atherosclerotic lesions. So that's extremely important because we now know we can actually reverse chronic disease. We also know that there are immune cells in the body and the brain that actually can eat the amyloid plaque that seems to be clogging up our brains. We now know that oral spirochetes, the bacteria that are associated with severe periodontal disease and not so severe periodontal disease, are the main constituent of this atherosclerotic plaque. This is very important too because we need to find these bacteria in people's mouth and eliminate and reestablish the balance in their mouth so they can be healthy. My first inkling of viruses being related to chronic disease was shortly before I published this article in Dentistry Today. It was a month or two, and I had found a reference in the literature that showed what prions were. They were discussing spirochetes, prions, virus, and systemic disease, and I realized that the bacteria, viruses, and other microbes, when out of balance, would cause chronic disease. And when I first decided to publish this article, I actually wrote a letter to the editor and I said, the article that we're doing, Protect Your Patients in Practice from Prions, Viruses, Systemic Disease, would be one of the most important articles that they will ever see in Dentistry Today or ever will. And they actually did, after they received this, publish this on their news link within 6 weeks, which I think indicates that they thought this was very important as well. And because of this publication in Dentistry Today, the leaders at the American Academy of Oral Systemic Health, which is our premier institution for studying the relationship between gum disease and heart disease, diabetes, and Alzheimer's and other chronic disease called me and asked me to do a webinar. And so this webinar was done on this subject back in March 21st, 2018. And this laid out the basis of what I'm going to be telling you today. My most recent book, called Killer Viruses Rising from the Flames, was published in 2020, about March. And this book actually, with a little different title, was ready to publish in December before we heard anything about COVID-19. But it discussed 4 other viruses that are very important. And this book goes into the immune suppression that allows the body to be vulnerable to these viruses. And then when COVID-19 hit, all they had to do was add the research for COVID-19. And it may have been the first book published on actually the underlying cause, why everybody died of, why so many people died of COVID-19, when it was actually deaths from these chronic diseases. Another book I published a little bit earlier than that was Chronic Disease Unfairly Targets Women. This, I think, is probably the most important work that I've done in research. It wasn't any discoveries I made, but I just combed through the literature. And literally, during this time period, in the last 10 years, I would work full time and come home and spend 30 more hours, weekend after weekend, month after month, year after year, because this subject was so important and so apropos to what is going on with our society today. And so every woman should read this book, and they need to do their lifestyle changes so that they can avoid being targeted by these bacteria and viruses to cause immune suppression and cognitive decline. In my opinion, Laurel Manuelides, MD, probably made the most important discoveries in 100 years in medicine, and it's called the Sphinx virus. It's a particle, virus particle, and the name of the disease is called slow progressive hidden infections of variable X latency, the Sphinx virus. And what this is a virus that's being attacked by the immune system. And I'm going to describe how this happens as we go along with this lecture. This is Laura, a picture of her, and in my opinion, she's one of the greatest women in research there is today. But when I read her first paper, I was so enthralled with it, and the fact that she found this very small virus that seems to be encapsulated. And so I wondered if it was one of these icosahedral structures that have 20 sides that are prevalent with other viruses that, if you watch my other lectures, you'll see what those other viruses are. And so she answered my email, and she said she hadn't really looked at that. So it struck a conversation up, and she sent me 5 of her papers. Some of them weren't published, and some of the stuff that I'm presenting came from this. But the important thing is that she finds in her studies with scanning electron microscopy that these virus particles are associated with amyloid plaque, or beta amyloid, which I'll describe in detail in a few minutes. But beta amyloid seems to be the common denominator between all these chronic disease, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's disease, Creutzfeldt, Jakob disease, which is a human version of mad cow disease. It's very important to understand this concept because it has great implications to dentistry and all surgeons that actually do surgery on these patients. Here is the basis of her research. And the importance is that beta amyloid seems to be the reaction of the body to these viruses. Here, I'll show the pointer here. This is Alzheimer's disease, and it looks like beta amyloid is some kind of a crystalline formation. And then here's the human form of mad cow disease, CJD, and this experimental CJD, and all show the same amyloid plaque. And what I feel, and I think she would concur with this is the commonality between all chronic disease. An important point that it could be made right now in this presentation is that the most recent research done by Manuelides has to do with the fact that these viruses are actually conserved within the brain and can replicate at will. So the chronic diseases can be triggered by these viruses when the environment is right. And it can go along with what we just talked about as far as environmental biologists saying that there's a protective mechanism in the brain that protects the younger members of a starving population.
Circular Sphinx DNAs has significant structural similarities to the Acinetobacter phage viruses. Phage viruses are called bacteriophages. These viruses attack bacteria and destroy them when they are out of balance with nature. Previous research reported that these viruses are isolated from mammalian brain cells. Acinetobacter bacteria are widespread opportunistic pathogens, and permanent transfer of these viruses to mammals' brains has not been reported. In the brain, research pointed to the Sphinx virus being concentrated in terminal synaptic boutons, which are small swellings that are found at the terminal ends of brain cell axons. Because brain is environmentally isolated, this Sphinx element is thought to be an antediluvian, belonging to the time before the biblical flood, organisms living in symbiosis with other cells in the brain. This harmony relationship was probably involved with some sophisticated brain functions, such as the evolutionary biologist's explanation for survival of the species scenario. This survival mechanism will be discussed later in the closing slides of this presentation. Quoting Manuelitis herself, late-stage aggregates of PRP, folded over prion amyloid and fibrillary tangles remain flags of a sinking ship that gives no clue about the initiating causes of later neurodegeneration. In transmissible spongiform encephalopathies, TSES or Prion diseases, like mad cow disease, the initiating cause is clearly an infectious agent with viral characteristics. The Sphinx virus.
Recently, there has been speculation that the spike protein created in the COVID-19 vaccine has something to do with prion diseases. In this presentation, it has been confirmed that prions react to viruses by stacking up to produce beta amyloid as an antivirus agent. So, it is not improbable to conclude that the immune system would attack the spike protein produced by a vaccine in a similar manner. As a matter of fact, the spike protein created by the translation of the vaccine RNA binds angiotensin-converting enzyme 2, otherwise referred to as the ACE2 receptor, located on endothelial cells of the lungs and blood vessels, which is a zinc-containing enzyme. This interaction has the potential to increase intracellular zinc. Zinc ions have been shown to cause the transformation of TDP-43 to its pathologic prion configuration. This reaction can explain the adverse reactions that are being documented on patients receiving the vaccine. The identification of rare TDP-43 mutations in Lou Gehrig's disease, frontotemporal lobar degeneration, Alzheimer's disease, and other neurological degenerative diseases suggests TDP-43 plays an important pathogenic role as a prion-producing molecule reacting to a virus, rather than merely being a marker of the disease. Virus-like compounds, such as the spike protein resulting from the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine, cause the immune system to produce prion compounds, like TDP-43, that convert into beta amyloid to attack and surround the virus particles, thus causing prion diseases which are far worse than COVID-19 itself. In the discussion of the origin of prion diseases, it begs some questions regarding the origin of the Sphinx virus. These questions include 1. How is the Sphinx DNA coded and preserved in the brain? 2. Why is its DNA associated with the Acinetobacter bacteriophage virus? And 3. Why did Manuelitis specifically refer to its origin being antediluvial? The literature clearly states that bacteriophages were used as gain-of-function research tools in spirochete DNA manipulation prior to the 60s and had something to do with the origin of Lyme disease. Was the Sphinx virus coded into the brain naturally before the flood? Or was it coded using bacteriophage gene modification techniques by someone else? Who would have known this technology at that time? Does this virus have something to do with the post-flood drastic decrease in longevity? This discussion, though very apropos here, needs much more development to understand, thus will be postponed and dealt with in more detail in a future presentation.
So now we're going to get into discussion of what amyloid is. There's basically two versions. There's a normal amyloid, and then there's a kind of a bastardized amyloid called beta amyloid. We're going to discuss the differences between the two and how they are acting when it's normal and then when it's not normal. What is amyloid? And to be honest with you, when I started doing my research into what amyloid was, I was literally shocked, because we have been hearing about prions for years associated with mad cow disease and CJD, and that it's a really dangerous thing, and that prions actually acted like viruses, and they could reproduce and they could cause other prions to do what they do when they're abnormal, is fold over, and then they're supposedly toxic. And supposedly you can't sterilize them, and it was indestructible. Well, it turns out that what we were taught was all wrong. And so I'm going to describe what normal amyloid is and then what beta amyloid is. Now I'm going to discuss what amyloid is. Amyloid is mainly a stacking of what we call prions. So here we have prions, and prions are a protein, and they stack up to form normal amyloid, and I'm going to discuss what that is. And abnormal prions fold up, and then they stack up to form what's called beta amyloid. And you can see on the blue here, little ribbons show how the prions stack up to form amyloid. Now, when I found this out, it was in some major textbooks for biology. And when I got into that and realized that prions were not what we were told, and they're really part of the normal system, I just couldn't believe what we were taught was so different from what it is.
What does the literature say about the normal function of prions in the body? The word prions conjures up malevolent feelings of doom, since the word is synonymous with the unusual fatal diseases we are discussing. However, Brown, 2001 reports that prions have positive functions within a normally functioning body. Normal amyloid is a stacking of normal prions. These functional amyloids have beneficial physiological roles in humans, such as contributing to pigmentation, the storage of hormones, the fertilization of eggs by sperm, antimicrobial responses, regulated necrosis, and cellular responses to stress, as reported by both Jackson and Hewitt, 2017. Vassallo, 2003, reports that prions also have a positive function in regulating copper within nerve cells that permits transmission of nerve pulses.
Everything I was taught and understood for, I would say, many years, I thought prions were bad, but they're actually not. The version that's folded over, I mean, beta amyloid, even though that produces beta amyloid, which we feel is toxic to nerve cells, but it's actually an antivirus compound. And several studies have shown this now, that it's not bad, but it's the body's reactions to the virus, and the virus is the one that is stimulated the production. So we've either got to boost the immune system to force the virus to go dormant, or we have to have the immune system destroy the virus, or some combination of that to overcome the immune system wanting to attack it. Beta amyloid it's a reaction to a virus. And it's the commonality in all chronic disease: Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, diabetes, Creutzfeldt, Jakob disease, and many more. So understanding that it's just a reaction to a virus that's there is very important, because now we can develop a strategy to actually reverse the whole disease process. Without understanding what the disease process is, you can't treat it, you can't understand it. But now, like I say, the greatest discoveries in medicine have been made in the last few years, and it was greatly overshadowed by COVID-19. But I hope that by you understanding it, together we can solve this problem and eliminate it in the first place, or prevent it in the first place, and if you have it, how to reverse it. So that by the time you're 60 years old, according to the research, 80% of us have this amyloid plaque clogging up our brains. And also it's the same thing that clogs up all the arteries and vessels of the body. It's just not, amyloid plaque is not just in Alzheimer's, but in all chronic disease, and it's where the name of disease is wherever those blood vessels where they're clogged up are. So by But now that we understand this and we know that needs to be cleared out, how do we clear out amyloid plaque to regain function? Well, one of the first things we do to eliminate amyloid plaque is realize that there's another constituent in here, which in some of my lectures and research I show are the carriers of some of these viruses to these various places in the body. So we have, they're called oral spirochetes, and they are found in the amyloid plaque in Alzheimer's disease. McDonald and McLosely, their research has definitively proved that oral spirochetes are associated with beta amyloid. So one way of preventing this altogether, and these oral bacteria come from the mouth. They come from bleeding gums and from periodontal disease and the plaque between the gum and the teeth. So what I've been doing over the years is I have a high-powered microscope, and I actually can appraise each patient for whether they have spirochetes, and if they do, how many and how virulent looking are there, and then we devise a plan to get rid of them and rebalance the bacteria in the mouth. So you have to get rid of the source before you can actually begin to eliminate the amyloid plaque that they seem to be associated with. Of course, the pharmaceutical companies, they thought they could make billions of dollars in eliminating this amyloid plaque, and actually over many years they actually found they could. But as I'll describe later, there was a little bit of problem with that because it didn't work and they had to abandon that research. In this research, the pharmaceuticals found that they could attack beta amyloid with what's called immunotherapy. And they actually could clear the amyloid plaque particles. But as I'll show later, there was a problem. So here's the problem the pharmaceutical companies had. You just follow the progression of heart disease. The patient's blood vessels got clogged up with beta amyloid, and it hardened into semi-rigid plaque within the walls of the blood vessels. And this amyloid plaque became the main supportive of the blood vessel wall. And then in the animal experiment, when this plaque was removed, the blood vessels would disintegrate. They would collapse, and it would cause clotting and bleeding. So if this was taken to live patient clinical trials, the researchers knew it would probably kill patients. So they had to abandon the research right then because by removing the amyloid plaque didn't eliminate disease. It just caused the breakdown of the blood vessels that were the amyloid was located in, which would kill the patient. So in research I've done in the last 2 or 3 weeks, I wanted to know if the body could naturally eliminate this amyloid plaque from the blood vessels. And to my surprise and glee, I found that their immune cells called monocytes have the ability to clear amyloid plaque if given the right time to do so. So I was very excited about this. So I continued my research, and I found that there are other immune cells that do the same thing. When I continued my research into whether the body or the immune system could clear beta amyloid, I found that in the brain, they're microglia cells, and they can actually phagocytize or eat, clear away the forms of beta amyloid. Patients that are just beginning this process, I'm almost sure we can reverse it. And we hope that in patients that are further down the road that putting them on the anti-inflammatories, cooling the immune system down, and then allowing the body to go in and clear out the beta amyloid, that we can begin to reverse some of this memory loss. One of the first clues that I had that we could begin to reverse heart disease was contributed by Dr. Stephen Gundry, MD. He told the story in his practice of patient coming to him that wanted bypass surgery, but when he was tested, it was too far gone to do the surgery. But the patient said, no, I discovered these nutrients. I'm going to reverse this. You can do the surgery on him. So Dr. Gundry said, okay, yeah, I'll give you 6 months. And so 6 months later, patient comes back and they go through the tests again. And lo and behold, he'd reduced it by 50%. And so Dr. Gundry, being a cardiac surgeon, did the bypass surgery, but it changed his life. And he found that the nutrients and the berry group. The polyphenols he identified were the chemicals that began to reverse this heart disease patient, reverse the amyloid plaque in heart disease patients. Discovery of polyphenols, in my estimation, was one of the great contributions to science. He also talks about lectins, and this one I've come to disagree with him on. As a surgeon and knowing other surgeons, they found that in arthritis that these joints were loaded up with lectins, and they say, oh, the lectins are causing inflammation. You can't, you got to avoid eating lectins at all costs because it causes inflammation, it causes arthritis. Well, I decided to do some research, and I found out that the lectins are something that he doesn't understand. He's wrong about this subject. When I Googled lectins and spirochetes, I was absolutely amazed the articles that came up, that lectins specifically target spirochetes. So in arthritis, the lectins actually associate themselves with mannose, and they actually attack spirochetes and put a coating around them so they're inactive and they stop the spirochetes. So in cases where the spirochetes in the mouth are prevalent and they're overpopulated, there's a constant reservoir of these spirochetes in gum disease that constantly feeding into the bloodstream, feeding into these arthritis lesions, so the body can never catch up to fighting spirochetes. So lectins are actually good because they're binding. It makes a sugar complex. It actually disables the spirochetes and allows the body to clear it out. But if you don't get rid of the source of spirochetes to begin with, then that process continues on and gets worse and worse and worse. So the key is get rid of the source of the spirochetes and then allow the body to heal itself in the arthritis.
Evolutionary biologists explain the modern epidemic of chronic disease differently, and it makes sense. This applies to older animals, especially females past the age of procreation, to preserve the lives of younger reproducing members of a species. Over the millennia, during times of drought and famine, a unique feature in the DNA activates to depress the immune system. This immune system depression leads to death and thus permits greater viability for the younger animals. They do not have to make as much effort to sustain the viability of an older, minimally contributing member. This is exactly what is happening in our modern society. As a result of our modern diet of non-micronutrient foods including refined carbohydrates, corn syrup, and sugar, our immune system senses these dietary deficiencies. It then concludes it must be a time of famine and scarcity. A switch is then flipped, and depression of the immune system occurs. The older animals begin to die off for the greater good of the younger community during a modern man-made famine. The Sphinx virus is related to mad cow disease and Alzheimer's disease, and further to most of all other chronic diseases. It continues eventually to death of primarily our older and non-producing members of society. If the evolutionary biologist's explanation of modern chronic disease is correct, then the mechanism for saving a starving population is unwittingly flipping the switch to release the Sphinx virus and cause heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and Alzheimer's disease, to name only a few of chronic diseases, to cull out diseased members of our society for the greater good.
The key to avoiding the whole species survival phenomena is to trick the immune system into thinking you are not starving. 2 things you can do immediately are, 1. Change your diet to include a variety of fruits and vegetables that are readily available in health food markets and most supermarkets. 2. Begin to eliminate refined carbohydrates, corn syrup, and sugar from your diet. If you like ice cream, for example, don't keep it in your house, go out and enjoy it as a treat at an ice cream shop. Inventory your pantry and eliminate all the killer junk foods. It's a numbers game, a little doesn't hurt, but too much will kill you in the long term. Dr. Nordquist designed a whole new approach to medicine and dentistry with prevention of chronic health disease and dental disease in mind. It is called the New Dental Deal. The new dental deal brings the benefit of new research to patients. It takes advantage of dentists' medical training and expands it. Body and oral wellness can be monetized through preventive dentistry and medicine. Throw out the old and bring on the new. Old production-based dentistry must stop. New wellness-based dental medicine must begin. The history of oral medicine started in the 70s. Dr. Nordquist graduated from the University of Louisville in 1973. In 1970, the School of Dentistry moved into a brand new modern facility like today's dental schools. It was the start of dental medicine, as far as the curriculum was concerned. In 1939, the new concept of oral medicine was conceived, and the University of Louisville changed the dental degree from DDS to DDM.D. At the time, it was believed that this designation more accurately described the modern practice of dentistry. When Dr. Nordquist was a student there, he was told that the DMD degree included more medical courses than the DDS programs. During the first 2 years, dentists and doctors were taught the same medical courses, taught by the same medical school professors. The intent back then, dentists would be trained more like physicians. So, it has taken over 50 years to realize this early innovation started so many years ago. Dental and medical medicine are the same and must be taught to patients as the same. So, what happened to this concept over the years? Based on Dr. Nordquist's experience over the last 50 years of practicing, writing and lecturing to dentists about chronic disease, the DMD medicine intent by professors changed to production-based mechanical dentistry. Dentistry needs to resurrect the medical intention of dentistry started so many years ago. Reasons why. Every nutrient that enters the body gains entrance through the mouth. The tissues of the mouth display the first signs of chronic disease. Treating dental disease requires the same medicine that keeps the entire body healthy. The best medicine for the body is a healthy diet. Science has shown that specific nutrients in the diet, when missing, cause chronic disease, or when added back into the diet, can reverse chronic disease. The dentist's regular recall programs are the perfect venue to teach patients the proper diet to reverse chronic disease. Dentists are best positioned to follow up on optimal health program because many patients are locked into regular recall programs. So, why not? How to do it? It's a 4-step strategy. Step number 1, diagnosis. Use the patient's health history to determine if the patient has any of the chronic diseases. Perform an oral examination to determine if patient has any form of periodontal disease. Then, using a high-powered microscope to find evidence of spirochetes in the dental pockets between the teeth and gums. Then use a cone beam CAT scan to find any residual infection in the bone or around the teeth. Step number 2, from the complete battery of tests, the dentist can place the patient on a chronic disease continuum. This chart then determines the course of treatment for the patient. Step number 3, treatment. Periodontal treatment, as necessary. Laser treatment, if needed, when a gross imbalance in oral bacteria is observed from the microscope examination. Surgery is completed to eliminate any bone infections in the jaw that are noted from the cone beam CAT scan. Step number 4, patient education, the medical part of the solution. Patients are instructed on how to prevent chronic diseases. If a patient already has one or many of these diseases, they are instructed on how to reverse them. It's a long process because most of these diseases took years before the symptoms appeared, and reversing them can take time. The dental part of the solution is training our patients on how to balance the bacteria and other microbes in their mouths. This is necessary to optimize the stability of all the microbes throughout the digestive system from the mouth to the butt. This concept is completely different than is being taught by dentists today. Dr. Nordquist's goal is to balance microbes in the mouth, not kill them. Since this education is being developed every day, we sometimes change the details taking into consideration any new innovations in research. Therefore, a membership in our program is necessary for long-term success. Who qualifies for Dr. Nordquist's new dental deal program? Since Dr. Nordquist practices in San Diego, California, the most convenient treatment is for patients to visit his office. However, over many years, because of all the time Dr. Nordquist has spent writing books, lecturing, and producing health videos, patients travel to San Diego for treatment from everywhere. Most importantly, the initial treatment is completed at the first visit. From then on, follow-up on treatment can be completed using either personal phone calls and/or live Zoom conferences. When patients realize they are saving, in most cases, thousands of dollars worth of unnecessary treatment in their local dentist's office, plus reduced cost for medical treatment and the inconvenience of being sick, a flight to San Diego is cheap compared to the alternatives. Dr. Nordquist has spent his entire career working toward these goals. Now it is ready to launch. Dr. Nordquist is excited to offer this new dental deal to his patients. You are only a phone call away from taking advantage of decades of hard work and diligent research in achieving optimal health. Thank you for your attention.